If you enjoy Jerusalem Unplugged, you may also like to listen to Stories from Palestine podcast. My name is Crystal. I'm originally from the Netherlands. I am married to a Palestinian and I live in Beit Safafa between Bethlehem and Jerusalem. I studied history and tour guiding and I produce a weekly podcast called Stories from Palestine. You can find it on your favorite podcast player or go to the website storiesfrompalestine.info.
Welcome to Jerusalem Unplugged, the only podcast dedicated to Jerusalem, its history, and its people. Your host, Roberto Mazza, will bring you guests discussing their relationship with the Holy City. A journey through history, society, feelings, and hopes for the future. Follow the podcast on all social media platforms at Jerusalem Unplugged.
Welcome to Jerusalem Unplugged, the podcast dedicated to Jerusalem, its history, and its people. I'm your host, Roberto Mazza, and today it's with great pleasure that my guest is Alon Arad. Alon is the new executive director of Emek Shaveh. Alon grew up in Tel Aviv and, in fact, still lives in the city. He's married to a physician, which is an interesting combination between an archaeologist and a physician, raising two daughters and a dog. He has a degree in archaeology and currently is completing his MA degree at Tel Aviv University. Now, he worked mostly on the early Bronze Age and focused on ancient urbanism and immigration. But now he found a different kind of interest in archaeology and tried to work on the question of archaeology serving as a political tool in Israel, a topic that we will certainly discuss later in the podcast. And now, he is the director, as I said earlier, of Emek Shaveh. Alon, welcome.
Thank you, Roberto, for this great opportunity to finally be here talking to you and to all of your listeners. It's a great honor.
Thank you. Now, the first question I want to ask is very much about Emek Shaveh. First of all, if you briefly can tell us, what does this word mean? And what is the main purpose of your organization? And then later we're going to delve more into the history and the activities of your organization, but just to sort of get our feet wet, about the NGO itself.
Okay, so Emek Shaveh stands for basically, let's say, common ground. The exact translation, it would be the middle that is in between, let's say, two mountains, or the valley that stands right in the middle, that both sides needs to go down. And it's metaphorically very beautiful thing to think about, that both sides have to walk down towards each other and giving up a little bit from their position, their strategic position. It might be in some way their political positions, their economic position, whatever it is. You have to go down towards your co-partner or the other side, basically. So this is the name. Emek Shaveh was founded by archaeologists some 12 years ago, actually, in 2009. I think there were few excavations or few archaeological projects that were kind of landmarks that were in the heart of these archaeologists that founded Emek Shaveh. The main one is obviously the project in Silwan, the City of David project, but also projects such as the building of the separation barrier, the separation wall, which during the construction, some excavations had to be done. And I guess we'll talk about later, what does it mean, salvage excavation? So there were a lot of salvage excavations along the way that basically destroyed a lot of archaeological sites. And from that point onwards, the founders understood that there is a need for a different discourse, mainly among archaeologists. So the main audience at the beginning, the first few years, were archaeologists. And the change theory, the change that was meant to be, was that archaeologists will view their work in a more, let's say, broader perspective on what they do and what is the meaning of what they do in present day. And so this was kind of the foundation of Emek Shaveh. And since then, obviously a lot of things happened around Israel, Palestine, Jerusalem in the field of archaeology. And there were many projects in many archaeological sites, but also in more, let's say, policy-making actions that Emek Shaveh was involved in. Some legal and litigation. Also, we had some court appeals, and mainly we developed a knowledge base around the politicization of archaeology in the whole region.
Now, before moving into activities of the Emek Shaveh organization, I want to ask you something about yourself. Can you tell us a little bit more about your background, and actually how did you become eventually the director of Emek Shaveh?
Oh, wow. So this is an interesting question, actually. So I first came to know Emek Shaveh. I think it was somewhere around the summer of 2013. That's not around, that's quite specific, actually. When I went to excavate Tel Bet Yerach, which is up north and next to the Sea of Galilee, on the shore of the Sea of the Galilee. And the professor was actually one of the founders of Emek Shaveh, Professor Rafi Greenberg. And he laid on the table, you know, of the students where we came in, some booklets of Emek Shaveh about Silwan and the city of David. And it was such a contrast, because for me as a student, you know, you go to university and you take a class on a certain period of time or certain, I don't know, types of vessels, or I don't know, typology and all these kind of very professional courses. And then you get this booklet which talks about archaeology in a whole different context, a whole different perspective. And you try to think about it, and you realize that you have so much influence on people that just live around this area. And I was finishing my BA, and I started my MA, and I was not involved with Emek Shaveh back then because I was too busy with, you know, finishing my studies and everything, and so this race of academical race. And somewhere in 2019, I decided to leave academia as a place where I thought to you know, to keep on and have my career. And I started working in a strategic consulting company in Tel Aviv, and I specialize in crisis management and conflict negotiation and so many other stuff that obviously does not relate to archaeology. And I worked there for a couple of years. And last summer, when there was the call for applicants to replace Yoni and Mizrahi, both one of the co-founders which directed Emek Shaveh in the past 12 years, I thought it's a position that in which I can fulfill all of my dreams, I would say, in archaeology. Okay, this is how I got here.
Well, that's a fascinating path. Again, like with many other guests, there's always one path that someone envisions for himself or herself, and then things turn sometimes very different. One interesting thing about Emek Shaveh, talking about the organization itself, is, if one is interested in browsing the website, you get this sort of a sense of the various activities. And one that caught my eye and made me read a lot of the material available on emekshaveh.org is this idea of community excavations. And I was wondering if you can tell us a little bit more about the concept of community excavation and exactly how it works for the organization, who are the people involved, and perhaps if you can tell us a little bit more about the example of a Mamilla community excavation.
Okay, so first of all, let's rethink a little bit what does it mean to do archaeology and who has, in a way, the power to do archaeology. So by law, if you think about it, or you know what, let's go a little bit even a bit back. Okay, so if we'll go and think about archaeology and the state. Okay, so basically most states at the moment in the world, in the Western world especially, kind of took over. They took over archaeology because I think it a bit related to the connection between national movements and history, and how history serves national movements, and what states most of the states did is that they regulated archaeology. So not everyone is can just go in the field and excavate what they want. In some places in Europe they have certain problems, let's say with metal detectors, but here following the British mandate, they brought the concept of stateship and everything, modern stateship, but also archaeology was regulated. So when you want to excavate, you're an archaeologist, you or me or any the archaeologist, if I want to excavate a certain site, I have to get permits for that. And these permits is basically the state way of telling people there are people who can excavate, who has the knowledge, who has the capacity, who has I don't know, academic affiliation, all these kind of um, issues that needs to be taken care of when you do archaeology, basically. And this differs from people who are not allowed to. And those who are not allowed to, we call them, antiquity thieves or vandalists or whatever. Now, if you think, who is the state? It's the people, basically, in, let's say, a topical way. So the state gives the archaeologist this piece of land in some way of custody to do what he does. And in most cases, these archaeologists, they don't have to negotiate, they don't have to talk, they don't have to be in any form of communication with people who live in, next, around the archaeological sites. So basically, us archaeologists are coming from wherever we come from. It can be from abroad, and it can be me going to Tel Bet Yerach in the Sea of Galilee from Tel Aviv, from basically outsiders, and to do whatever we want. True, we have certain methodological rules and ethical rules, and we follow a certain way, but basically we're outsiders that come and change the place, and we can change it however we want. We can the difference between archaeologists, the knowledge that we have, the power that we have through this knowledge, in comparison to, I don't know, a farmer that just cultivate his land. He doesn't know what this piece of pottery means. He doesn't know what this structure means. And I have absolute power to change the story. I can tell him, yeah, this is the temple of, or this is the palace of, this is a wine storage room, or this is just a regular house, and so on and so on. And then I create this narrative of it, whether I want to or I don't want to. Sometimes I want to have a very narrow narrative, such as this is a house, or this is a structure. But sometimes I want a much bigger narrative. I want it to be King David Palace, or I want it to be a certain, I know, battle. It can be everything. And in this place where I don't want to use the word struggle, but this place in the tension, this is where I think community archaeology comes into place. It gives the community involvement within sites that are in their immediate surroundings, okay? And through this process, they actually, in some way, I don't want to say claim ownership, but they're more involved in both the actual work itself, obviously. And if you have read on such projects, they come into the field and they do some excavation, and some places they do some restoration, and they get involved with the finds, and they watch the pottery, and they sit with the pottery reading, and we tell them this is from the Iron Age or the Bronze Age. But through the process, they relate to the site in a much different way. So they're not just visitors on the site. There are active contributors to the formulation of the site, to the creation of the narrative. And this brings a lot of also responsibility on the archaeologist itself, because we cannot anymore tell stories that endanger or threat, in a way, the narrative or the stories or the relationship of these residents or these people that come to the sites, and we cannot use them to create a narrative that endangers their own existence in a way. So this is the more theoretical, I think, perspective, to my opinion, on it.
Let's move to another activity of Emek Shaveh that I found extremely interesting, given also the political controversies of archaeology. You're interested in, and you did so, you filed objections, particularly when you see planning and constructions committees working on certain areas, either of Jerusalem, of Palestine, or Israel, and therefore they sort of discard, neglect, or create their own narratives about some archaeological sites. And I was wondering if you can tell us a little bit more about this particular area, and if you also have examples, particularly related to Jerusalem, where Emek Shaveh tried to object to some of the, let's say, as you said, legal public activities.
Yeah, so the legal sphere in Emek Shaveh is actually quite interesting, because we normally talk among archaeologists in a level that is professional, that is ethical, which is not legal, straightforward legal. And with the public, we talk, about narrative and politics and how they being combined. And the legal sphere is a place where the discourse is very much different, because there is a place where we can say that it was a major injustice. There was something which is being hidden. For example, freedom of information appeals that we had. Now, in this field, we had filed several complaints along the years, actually quite many, on different subjects. So we had, for example, some appeals regarding the activity of the Elad Foundation in the city of David, and how excavations are being done in tunnels and the planning process of the Kedem Compound Center of Elad. Unfortunately, in most cases, court stood with the settlers' organizations. But we also appealed against, for example, the more recent cable card plan, which is basically a planning process appeal. In this matter, we had a very big coalition with architects and nature protection and everything, and all these kind of other organizations that we appealed together. And basically, the idea was that the state of Israel has set some rules in the surrounding of the old city, and this is basically the what we can call now the Jerusalem Wall National Park. Now, the idea of having a national park is that you won't develop anything near the city walls in order to maintain its unique character and to keep it visible and to keep the landscape around it undeveloped and kept in a more, let's say, historical, with brackets, historical, authentic. And then came the government with their plan of having a cable cart that will start from the first station going up to Mount Zion and ends on the rooftop of the Kedem Compound Center, which is approximately, let's say, 30 meters from the old city walls next to Dunn Gate. And this structure will rise up to a height which is even higher than the city walls. And that just in contrast to the whole idea of having a national park there. And we can have a footnote here, which obviously the residents, which are mainly Palestinians in these areas, are not capable of doing any development or having very much struggling doing any development in their own properties. And the state of Israel comes and put this massive, huge construction next to the city walls. And it's important now to understand what were we appealing against. So we were obviously appealing against the whole plan, but we were appealing against the planning process, which went through, let's say, I think it's called the National Infrastructure Committee. And when things go through this channel, the normal process that involves, objections by the residents and by professional organizations like Emek Shaveh and others, and by whoever wants to appeal against it through the normal committees, you can come forward and appeal. And here it was just ran through a different channel, which was a shortcut that can prevent any of these things. We had some appeals on archaeological sites on the West Bank, like Tel Shiloh, Silwan, and the development over there, and many other places. I think we don't have we should have another chapter on archaeology and the legal stand, because it's very interesting to see, and I know you're interested in a bit more recent history. Many of the law here of archaeological laws are descendants of the Ottoman law, that went through the British Mandate Law and turned into the Israeli or Jordanian laws. And I think the whole legal aspect is worth having another conversation about.
Well, I think that since the famous dispossess excavation in the 1860s, all of the various powers that ruled, so obviously the British, the Ottomans earlier, the Israeli and the Jordanians, also for a period of time, they all implemented some rules and regulation about archaeology, understanding that obviously it is a controversial activity. And if not just between Palestinian and Israeli, right in the current era, but also between religious denominations, often within the same faith, particularly when we talk about the Christians, obviously Catholics and Greek Orthodox, a lot of disagreements about where to excavate, whether to excavate at all, and, you know, the meaning of a finding. So certainly is a very complex activity. I'm
It's a
curious about.
political one. It's a political activity. We change the map. We go to a place which was either forgotten or were changed, its meaning changed a long time. And we change it and we excavate and we turn it into, you know, a hill that had, I don't know, a name or a number or was sometimes nothing. And we turn it into a site and we give it a name and we give it a lot of meaning and we tell different stories sometimes, which was, you know, either sometimes it's okay, you know, not too many people still care about Neolithic cemeteries at the moment, so they don't claim ownership over, I don't know, the bones or to prevent working. But you have communities in this place that relate to these places, and we change them, and this takes me back to what I think I said about the power of archaeologists to change and the story and the narrative. And I think this is what motivated powers or states to create this regulation.
Well, I'm always fascinated by, you know, archaeological excavations, particularly in Jerusalem, and the power they have to trigger not just sort of political debates, but often also to trigger political violence, which we have seen literally throughout the past 150 years, even 170 years. A number of excavations, once they became public, they really triggered riots of various nature and size, sometimes smaller, sometimes even bigger. And again, it really shows the power of archaeology as a political tool. And I was wondering, you know, given the current situation in Israel, Palestine, particularly in Jerusalem, what are the most pressing issues for you and Emek Shaveh's organization, particularly related to the city of Jerusalem?
So I think the most pressing issue from you know, obviously my perspective is, you know, archaeology and heritage. So I think the most pressing issue is the growing connection between Israeli authorities, such as the INPA, the Israeli National Park Authority, and the municipality of Jerusalem, and settler organizations such of Elad, which runs the city of David. I think this growing or deepening relationship is putting a lot of stress on archaeological and heritage sites, because turning these places into, you know, touristic attractions goes along with the very monolithic Jerusalem that these settlers want to create. And this monolithic Jerusalem neglects present-day Jerusalem. It neglects 2,000 years of history of Jerusalem from, let's say, the 2nd century and the failure of the Bar Kokhba rebellion, which sent us all to a 2,000 years exile, story-wise. And I think that creating this touristic attractions has a lot of meaning, because it's normalizing, it's eroding the difference between East and West Jerusalem. It's creating this feeling or sense that Silwan is not in East Jerusalem. The old city is not East Jerusalem. Is an integral part of the whole Jerusalem and ancient Jerusalem within that. So, And we see this growing activity outside to different areas, such as the Hinnom Valley, such as Mount of Olives these days. Um, and this heritage discourse that being used by settlers is most stressing for me and for us, because it's taking a discourse that is beautiful, that can create and present the complexity and the change over time, and the fact that different communities lived here a long time and it doesn't endanger anyone at the present. It shouldn't be. I mean, in my tour, and maybe we'll talk about our tours later, and in the tour, we are saying that archaeology can be done in a way that is different, that is not in order to claim ownership eventually. So for me as an archaeologist, although I think I haven't seen, let's say, scientific, academic proof for the existence of the palace of King David in Silwan, if such were in our possession, if archaeological work has provided detailed, significant proofs for that, I wouldn't care that there isn't King David. I don't have anything against King David. I don't want, I mean, we cannot completely ignore it. Obviously, it's a very meaningful character in Israeli public. But I think that from having King David Palace towards owning the land or changing the borders of Jerusalem, there's a big difference. It's a big gap that shouldn't happen.
You just mentioned something that made me think about also the question of sort of archaeological remains as proof of what existed or not. I mean, for instance, the famous Nia Church, which we knew it existed, but there were no archaeological remains available up until I think the 1970s, where eventually was found. So there was proof, but we knew it existed, right? So we knew there was certainly a city of David, perhaps not as big as many would like to claim. But you're right. Then at some point you have to accept the fact that there's some build up on top of that area, and we need to take into account the current, the people living on that. And so I guess then archaeology has to deal with the reality rather than just the claims and the past. I'm interested in something that you mentioned at the very beginning, which is this concept of salvage excavations. And so I was wondering, what did you mean by salvage excavation? What do they mean to you and Emek Shaveh?
So in archaeology, we have in the archaeology here, I mean, we have two main types of excavations. We have, let's call them academic excavations, which are excavations which are being done, in a process which you have a research question, and then you go to choose a site that might answer this question, or you have a question regarding a certain site, and you want to collect data, and you design a project, and it's an ongoing project. It might take years and years and years, and some excavations are being done for 20, 25 years, and so these are the academic ones. Salvage excavations come in place in these places where we understand that development cannot be prevented completely. I mean, in a place like Israel and Palestine and I think entire Middle East basically, where people have been living for millions of years, you can't really go to anywhere without uh, hitting some archaeological remains. So salvage excavations come in place in order to excavate before development and to figure out what is going on. And in most cases, we archaeologists give back this land to the contractor, and then they construct whatever it is, a shopping mall, a residence, a road, I know, sewage, whatever it is. But these excavations are designed to, as they are, to salvage, to go in, to do a fast excavation. In most cases, very short time is being given, and very limited resources. And you know, you go in and you find what you find, and you document what you document. And in some cases, there are important sites that were actually found in this way and were capped, and development was prevented. The road was shifted, or the shopping mall was moved aside or canceled completely. Or so there are many places which archaeology changed the planning process. Um, but it's important because it's also becoming more and more as a tool of the Israeli Antiquity Authority to excavate in order to develop touristic archaeological attractions. And it's kind of like a paradox because it's this vicious circle. And you see it in Silwan, in the city of David, with the pilgrimage road or the Givati parking lot, which are massive excavations, which are being done under the title of salvage excavation. And and the pilgrimage road is a salvage excavation designed to find the road itself. So what is the meaning of the finds? If you know what you're going to find and you do the whole process of excavation, and there's one thing important that I forgot to mention, we have to think about archaeology as a destructive act. Archaeology in a certain, let's call it a square or an area, can be done only one time because we dismantle the layers, we dismantle the creation of the site that was taken maybe thousands of years. All these accumulations take time, and we dismantle them with, methodology. We collect, we document, we do all these like we measure things, we count, we publish it. But eventually, what we do is we destroy these sites, and it's impossible to to retrace it or to redo it once it's being done. Also, if it was covered again. So if I would excavate this square or a pit or whatever and cover it, it will not remain as it was formulated throughout the years. So this is a savage excavation, and I think it's being more and more used as a tool uh, um, for developing uh, archaeological sites, and I think it's not a good practice actually. And I'm sure people from the Israeli Antiquity Authority might be a bit angry for what I'm saying, but they're doing a great job. I have not too much criticize on the people themselves. I think it's a organizational decision. It's a policy decision that needs to be changed in this matter.
I'm curious about another sort of point about the Emek Shaveh organization before we talk about tours, and perhaps we're going to talk about something more positive. There is a line in the website that says that you and obviously the people working for Emek Shaveh see archaeology as an endeavor that can benefit the common good. And the very name, sort of the Middle Valley, suggests that. But do you think there is a chance that archaeology may be turned around and used for something different than just making claims?
Sure. So first of all, archaeology is a science. It's an academic endeavor of researching the history, the long history, sometimes a very long history of this land. It's a way of researching human behavior. How do we interact with artifacts? How do we interact with landscapes? How we do a lot of things. So it's the core of it is an academic interest, and this is what drives most archaeologists is their academic or curiosity of understanding basically how do we got here, and what does it mean to be a human being, what does it mean to I know not being what does it mean to be urban, what does it mean, a lot of these kind of things, the processes that we can see and research through archaeology. The fact that it is being used in order to justify national claims or nationalistic claims is a twist that uh, uh, should be stopped, and the responsibilities of archaeologists, because archaeologists cannot come and say, okay, I published my materials, I published my claims, I published my interpretation, whatever this member of Knesset or I know political activists are doing with it, it's on their responsibility, and how they construct their his claims is based on that is their issue, not mine. Um, but we do share a big portion of this responsibility. We should not leave this arena empty, or because there is no vacuum here. And I think that, yeah, shifting into a more constructive discourse or discussion about archaeology should involve archaeologists. And you said what we are writing on our website, that should be, served as a bridge, as a way of bringing together communities, is by using elements of archaeology in order to do that. It's to present that, okay, there were Neolithic people, then there were the early Bronze people, then there were the Iron Age people, and they all came and left, and they all did things here. They cooked, and they prayed, and they cultivated their lands, and to present that it is a process. It's a process of ever-changing place. It's a process that people relate to the place, and it does not necessarily suggest that they are bad or evil or good.
Well, that's wishful thinking. I guess at
I
the
hope. I can
moment, yeah.
hope. I can just hope.
Now, moving towards the last couple of questions I have, I was wondering if you can tell us a little bit more about sort of this more practical activity that also involves people outside the Emek Shaveh, that is the tours that you organize throughout Jerusalem and throughout Palestine. Can you tell us a little bit more what's the rationale of these tours and how they work? And then I will ask you later about a specific one.
Okay, so basically our tours approach different audiences. So we have tours which are designed more towards, let's say, historical, archaeological communities, architects, and so on. But we also have a lot of tours which are open for the public. And the idea behind it is that we can and we hope to present an alternative perspective on archaeology. And by alternative, what I mean is that it's not presenting directly, the Palestinian narrative, because I'm not a Palestinian, I'm an archaeologist. But what we are trying to do in these tours is to present a different perspective on how to use archaeology, how archaeology is being done. We question a lot of the people, and you would be amazed to hear the answers. Like in every beginning of my tour, I ask people, what archaeologists do? What do we do? What do we search for? What is the process of archaeology? So yeah, most people know that we excavate. Uh, some think it's dinosaurs, which is not. No, but some does not. most of the people does not really think like in details. Like, what is the everyday? What do? We take this dirt and we sift it and we pick up the pottery sherds and all of this. So this is the beginning usually of the tours. But then we go on and we see how the archaeology is being presented, and what does it mean to have archaeological site within a community which does not relate to it? What is this tension between the community and archaeology, and how does this become a place of antagonism, and how it becomes a place of depriving from lands, and how it is being used to approach different audiences? Because obviously, what you see in the museum or what you see in the presentation there in City of David is is targeting certain audiences. So we question who is the target audience here? Who does it supposed to influence, and to what action it's supposed to influence them? And so these are and it's all sitting on archaeological basis, because this is the action that is being done in order to change the landscape. So this is the core, and then we grow out of it into different elements of usage of archaeology or misuse of archaeology.
You talked about different audiences, and I was wondering if you can tell us who are the people actually taking these tours. Obviously, scholars, maybe people with a sort of an interest in the current situation of Jerusalem, Israel, and Palestine. But do you have specific categories of people that are coming and taking these tours?
Yeah, so first of all, you have to understand that throughout history, like the recent history, archaeology shifted a lot of times, but it quite remained very much interesting for a lot of audiences in Israel. So a lot of people from huge variety of ages and backgrounds have interest in archaeology, and you can see it just, if you go to the Israeli websites and news websites, you'll see, I think, almost every week there is a an article about archaeology, about a certain find. So people are very much into dealing with archaeology all the time. In schools, they go to Masada, they go to Caesarea, they go to Tel Dan, Chatzor. So the people are involved with archaeology greatly in the area. So we do have among Israeli audiences a huge variety. Obviously, we have academic audiences that some scholars approach us to bring their courses, or students who are organizing to come and join one of our tools. Um, and we have also a lot of international audiences that are coming. Unfortunately, our tools are only in Hebrew and English at the moment. Hopefully, maybe someday we'll develop more languages, tools in different languages. But we have people from all over the world coming to our tools. You know, People are interested, and people are interested to experience a different storytelling of ancient Jerusalem.
I was wondering if you can take us through one of your tours, and I'm just suggesting, but anyone would be great. But because we talked about earlier, obviously the city of David and Silwan, and also the Givati parking lot. So for those that may not be familiar with the city of Jerusalem because they never visited or only visited once, and take different tours, if one of the listeners would join one of your tour, how would it work? I mean, where do you start? What would you see, and where does it end?
Wow. It's I love to imagine it. A great way of explaining how the tour is being viewed, I think. So we usually start at the Dung Gate, because this is the connection between the old city, which is being perceived as, the old city from the beginning of time. A lot of the people don't know they actually, the southern hill, Silwan, Wadi Khilwe neighborhood, is the ancient part of Jerusalem, which is at the moment outside of the old city walls. So we start there, and we talk about the old city as the center of Jerusalem, as the center of the and tension and attention, both. It's the center of attention, as we have seen just recently with Ramadan, and Temple Mount Haram Sharif in the center of it, being the the heart of and radiating the influence all over this historical basin. Um, and then we start from there talking about what is archaeology and how we do archaeology, and we do a brief introduction to archaeology because it's important to understand, some basic terms, stratigraphy and such, and then we just start going down, having our Givati parking lot on our right hand side. We're seeing it from above the huge area that was taken for these excavations. And then we continue and go into the City of David Archaeological Park, which is run by Elad Foundation. And we go to this outpost, which is on the rooftop there. And there you can see and feel, I think, and sense why they chose this place, Elad, I mean, for their operation, being just outside of the city walls, circulating it from south between the old city and Mount Zion and Mount of Olives, and we go over, all the area that we're seeing, and trying to understand what does it mean to bring people down here, because you can see the green line. The green line is in Mount Zion. You can see it, and then you understand what does it mean to erode it. What does it mean to bring thousands of people across this line to Silwan? And what does it mean? How does it influence on the old city itself? And how does this relate to the old city itself? And then we just go in down there, they have all these underground archaeological park, and we talk about what does it mean to have underground archaeology, which is basically undermining, literally, but also metaphorically, undermining the presence of Palestinians there. And what does it mean to have a touristic attraction which you don't see the landscape, which you have a very narrow perspective, and how it is being controlled, and how you can control the narrative in a very interesting way when you don't have to see, hear, smell, meet Palestinians. What does it mean to go in tunnels under houses? And we go through several spots, and we see different types of archaeology. We see the salvage excavation of the Givati parking lot, and we talk about the difference between academics and salvage. And we go to see Shiloh excavations, which was an academic excavation. And we connect all these different types of archaeology, the underground, the one that is exposed, the one that is salvage, and we connect all these dots into how narrative is being done and how it is being translated. So we go over the different signs and we see what is being written. Okay, so there is a sign here that says, for example, the large stone structure, but underneath it, it says it's King David Palace. What is the difference between a large stone structure and King David Palace? What this transition demands, what happens in the background of it, in the storage room, in the archives, where is the academic debate being translated here? Because obviously there was a debate, but the debate happens somewhere else. It does not happen on the sign. It happens in journals, which nobody reads. I mean, some read, sorry for the whole archaeological community, but some read these articles, but it's in a different language, not just Hebrew and English. It's archaeological language with all these terms, and so it's not accessible. And what happens in the translation of this research? And then we go further down and going outside of the park into the village itself, into the Silwan, and we see the difference between settler houses and Palestinian houses, and we see how a Lad Foundation is much bigger endeavor. And I think one of my favorite spots is this connection between the village and the archaeological park is that you go down these stairs and you see this map, and there is this beautiful colored map, hand-drawn map of Silwan, of City of David, and it looks like this beautiful town somewhere in the mountains with all these green spots of trees and plots of land, and it's look a bit ancient, and you see the archaeological park and all the houses looks nice, and you see the different tours that you can take, and it's the contrast between that and reality. It does not reflect any of the tensions, obviously. It does not reflect any of the local community. I'm laughing because it's a bit embarrassing every time that you go by that map. And then we go in and we see a bit more of archaeology in Raymond Weil excavations, and we go back into the more Palestinian side of Silwan, and we see the difference. We get the contrast. We get the contrast of what is mean to live in a street where most of the houses are Jewish owned, and what does it, how does it connect to the archaeological park, the archaeological experience, and the contrast is great, is intense at some point. And we finish with the exit of materials of dirt from the underground excavations done on the Pilgrimage Road, and there we kind of like summarize everything and we present this ongoing endeavor that I know someday probably will be open to the public.
Well, I made a point to myself that next time in Jerusalem, I will certainly take one of your tours and I encourage all of the listeners, particularly those that are in Israel and Palestine, to join one of them. I have one last question.
Yeah.
Is there anything that I didn't ask about the activity, the work of Emek Shaveh that you want to talk about?
So actually, it's important for me to just note something that although we deal a lot with advocacy, with dealing with the public narrative and everything, we are the core of our business is archaeology and how archaeology is being done and for what purposes and how it is being translated into, let's say, common language, how it's being translated into narratives. And I think that Jerusalem is at many times the center or the focal place for activity. We also operate both in the West Bank, and these days we have a very big project around Mount Ebal, latest publications that probably you and some of the listeners have saw the curse and all the renewed interest in Mount Ebal, and I hope that at least some of the listeners will sign in to our newsletter, and because we're about to publish a report regarding that and the use of settlers in archaeology in order to change the reality in the West Bank. But we also operate within Israel, and we have a lot of conversations with archaeologists and architects nature protection organizations, and in places like Lod and Jaffa and Haifa and other places. So the problems are a bit different in different areas, but there is this one line that connects all of them, and it's that we have to create a more tolerant archaeology here. We have to be more inclusive and not just taking out things. We should bring in and should embrace the fact that there are many stories, there are many narratives here, and people can interact with archaeological sites in many different ways. It can be in a national level, a part of your identity. It can be in a family level of your. It can be a personal, because I know you had experienced something with the site and you love to go up there and sit on Tel Megiddo and read a book. And it might be a very important part for in your identity, in part of your time, and it's okay. It does not endanger everybody that you have these feelings towards. And I want that people will feel free to relate to different heritage sites, and will find the opportunity to do so, and find signs in a language that they can understand and read. And I think this is something that was important for me to say.
This was Alon Arad, Executive Director of Emek Shaveh. I will post the link to the organization website, emekshaveh.org. Alon, thank you so much.
Thank you, Roberto.
Thanks for listening. If you enjoyed this episode and you'd like to support the podcast, please share it with others on social media or leave a rating and review. To catch all the latest, follow us on Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook @Jerusalem Unplugged. Thanks, and I'll see you next time.